The crash in the forest *, the night sky over the forest was quiet and dark. Only the wind moved through the tall trees, brushing leaves gently. But then the silence broke with a deep rumble from above. A streak of light tore across the sky, burning. Bright like a falling star, animals ran, birds screamed, and the earth shook as the object crashed into the forest. Trees snapped like sticks. Fire sparked, and smoke rose high. From miles away, people saw the light and wondered if a plane had gone down. But one man didn't wonder. He acted. His name was Jacob, an old man who once served in Earth's border wars. He lived alone near the woods, quiet and calm, but always ready. He grabbed his flashlight and rifle, threw on his coat, and stepped into the night. The path was rough, but he moved fast, guided by the smell of smoke and the strange light ahead. The forest had changed. The air felt heavier, like something alien had touched it. Jacob stopped at the edge of the crash site, and what he saw made him grip his rifle tight. A large silver pod sat in a crater, steam hissing from its sides. Parts of it were broken, glowing with strange blue energy. It didn't look human, not even close. He moved slowly, carefully, not knowing if it was safe. Then he heard a soft sound, a cough, or maybe a cry. He raised his light, and there, lying beside the pod, was a girl. She looked like no girl he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered in shades of violet and blue, smooth and glowing faintly. Her hair was silver, long and wet with rain, and her face looked young and fragile. But her eyes, when they opened, were deep with pain and fear. She was shivering, her body weak, and she tried to crawl backward when she saw him. Jacob put his hands up, showing he meant no harm. He dropped the rifle and stepped closer. Slowly, she collapsed again, whispering a word in a strange tongue. Then tried to stand, but failed. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifting her gently into his arms. She was light, too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. Jacob carried her back through the dark woods, one step at a time. She didn't fight, didn't speak, just kept her eyes closed and held on to his coat. His cabin was old, but warm, with a fireplace and a cot in the corner. He laid her down, covered her in blankets, and checked her wounds. There were cuts on her arms, and strange burns glowing faint blue. He didn't understand them, but he cleaned them carefully and gave her water. She drank slowly, then fell asleep. Her body still shaking, Jacob sat nearby, watching her breathe. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but something in him said she needed help, not fear. The next morning she woke up, gasped, and tried to run, but her legs failed, and she hit the wooden floor. Jacob raised his hands again, saying, "It's okay, you're safe." She looked around, panicked, then spotted the food he placed on the table. She pointed to it, and he nodded. She ate with her hands, messy and fast, like she hadn't eaten in weeks. Afterward, she leaned back and stared at him, unsure. He smiled gently and pointed to himself. "Jacob." She blinked, then touched her chest and said, "Rena." That was the moment everything changed. Over the next few days, Rena stayed inside the cabin. She didn't speak much, but she drew pictures on paper to show things: stars, ships, fire, and people with strange eyes. Jacob listened and watched, slowly learning that Rena wasn't just from another place. She was from another world, another life, one filled with danger. She showed him a device on her wrist that blinked, with symbols he couldn't read. Sometimes it beeped softly, and she would go pale. Jacob guessed it was calling someone or something. He tried to turn it off, but she shook her head and said, "No safe." It was clear she was scared of being found. That night, as rain hit the roof and fire warmed the cabin, Rena sat by the window. She looked at the sky like it hurt her to remember it. Jacob sat beside her, holding a mug of coffee, silent. Finally, she whispered, "No, go back." He looked at her and nodded. "You don't have to." She turned to him, her eyes glassy with tears, and for the first time, she smiled. It was small, sad, but real. Jacob didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, he had a guest from the stars who just wanted to feel safe, and he would make sure she did, no matter what came next. She doesn't belong here. Rena stood barefoot in the wooden cabin, holding a spoon like it was a weapon. Jacob watched her from across the table, trying not to laugh. She had never seen peanut butter before, and now she was staring at it like it might explode. He dipped a spoon, ate it, and smiled. "It's food, not poison." She slowly copied him, tasted it, then paused. Her silver eyes widened as her mouth moved slowly, testing the texture. Then she gave a quiet nod, as if she had tasted something holy. Jacob chuckled, realizing how different her world must be. Everything was new to her, from forks to soap to rain. But the one thing she seemed to understand best was silence. She rarely spoke. Only a few English words learned from Jacob's gentle teaching. She listened more, watched everything, and kept her back close to the walls. At night, she stayed by the fireplace and traced glowing patterns in the air with her fingers. Jacob had never seen anything like it. Sometimes it looked like maps, sometimes like memories, but her face always grew heavy. Like the drawings hurt her heart. He guessed they were memories of a life that no longer existed, a palace, perhaps, or a family far away. He never asked questions, just made her tea and stayed near. And in that strange stillness, she began to heal one morning. She followed him outside for the first time. The sun lit her hair like molten silver, and birds flew overhead. She flinched at the sound of a woodpecker, but didn't run. Instead, she walked slowly through the trees, touching bark with wonder. Jacob watched her crouch near a flower and whisper something in her native tongue. She smiled and held it up proudly, like a treasure. He realized then that she had never seen Earth before. Everything was magic to her, the breeze, the dirt, the butterflies, and for a moment, she didn't look like someone running from something. She looked like a girl finally free. But that peace didn't last long. That same evening, the device on her wrist blinked red. A loud sound echoed in the sky, dull and low. Not from Earth. Rena froze. Her eyes locked onto the clouds. She ran back inside the cabin and turned off all the lights. Jacob followed, confused, until she grabbed a pen and wrote one word on paper. Hunters. His hands clenched the rifle out of habit, the soldier in him waking again. Rena sat in the corner, hugging her knees, repeating the word, "no safe." Jacob knelt down and placed a blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said softly. Though he wasn't sure if it was true, but she looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she nodded without fear. The next day, they worked together to hide the pod deeper into the forest, covered it with leaves, branches, and even dragged fallen trees across it. Rena was stronger than she looked, moving rocks and pulling ropes without complaint. When it was done, she looked at Jacob and said, "Thank you." With perfect pronunciation, he smiled and replied, "We're in this together." She touched his hand, not as a stranger now, but as someone trying to trust. Later, she drew a star chart and showed him where she came from. A small world near a glowing sun, marked with a symbol that looked like a crown. She pointed to herself, then the crown, then made a slashing gesture across it. Jacob understood she was royalty once, but no longer. At night, she began helping with chores, cutting vegetables, feeding the chickens. She laughed once when a chicken chased her, and Jacob knew it was the first real laugh she had allowed herself. Every sound she made was music, soft and strange, like wind through crystals. The villagers nearby began to notice Jacob's strange guest. One young girl came by with cookies and asked, "Is she your daughter?" Jacob hesitated, but before he could answer, Rena stepped forward and bowed. "I am Rena," she said clearly. And the child giggled. After that word spread of the quiet. Foreign girl living with the old war veteran, no one questioned her. Not yet. But Rena began to feel something she hadn't felt in years belonging. Still, every night, she looked at the stars through the cabin window. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her fingers moved like she was counting time. Jacob watched her sometimes and wondered what she waited for. Then one evening, she drew something. Different, a picture of a man and woman standing under stars. She pointed to Jacob, then to herself, and smiled. He looked at her, confused, and she just said one word. Home. Jacob's heart skipped, but he didn't speak. He simply sat beside her and watched the stars in that silence, without war or fire. Something strange and beautiful was growing. Not just between a human and an alien, but between two souls who were both once lost. When the sky spoke again, the wind carried something strange that night. Something Rena felt before she even stepped outside. She had been drawing quietly near the fireplace, her fingers tracing soft light into the air. But suddenly, her hand froze, and the glowing shapes faded. Her eyes turned upward, toward the wooden ceiling, as if she heard a sound Jacob could not. She stood slowly, walked out the door, and stared into the star-filled sky. Jacob followed, still drying his hands on a towel, not yet alarmed. Then he felt it too. Not a sound, but a pressure, like the weight of a storm coming from above. The sky was too quiet, the stars too still. Then a dull rumble rolled across the heavens, and a thin beam of blue light flashed down between the clouds. Rena's breath caught in her throat, and she whispered, "They found me." Jacob looked up and narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Rena didn't answer. She just ran back inside and activated her wrist device. It blinked furiously. Red symbols spinning in a pattern that Jacob didn't understand. She slammed her palm on it, trying to shut it down. When that didn't work, she threw the device into the fire. It sparked, hissed, and melted into glowing dust. Jacob grabbed her shoulders. "What is going on?" She looked at him with eyes full of panic, then pointed upward. "Not Earthship," she said, her voice trembling. "Hunters." Jacob didn't wait. He moved fast, grabbing his old gear rifle binoculars, his comm radio. Then he turned to her and said, "If they come, they'll regret it." That night, strange shadows moved near the village. Men in black suits, faces hidden behind glowing masks, moved through trees like ghosts. They scanned buildings, fields, and even a local barn. Villagers heard nothing, saw nothing except a shimmer, like heat waves in the dark. But Jacob saw them, one by one, through his old thermal scope. They weren't human, not fully. Their movements were too sharp, too quiet. Rena hid in the basement, wrapped in blankets, her hands gripping the small flower crown the village girl had given her. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but she trembled so badly her teeth clicked. Jacob stood watch all night, his rifle ready, eyes never closing. And when morning came, the shadows were gone, but the fear remained. The next day, Jacob drove into town, pretending everything was normal. He walked into the small diner, sat at the bar, and ordered coffee. The owner, a sharp old woman named Maggie, leaned over and whispered, "Strangers came through last night, asking odd things. Female visitors, unusual energy." Strange questions like that. Jacob just nodded and said, "Tourists," but inside, he knew this was not over. Back at the cabin, Rena was already packing a bag. She wrote a message on the wall using her glowing fingers. "I must go." But when Jacob returned, he shook his head, grabbed a hammer, and erased the message. "You're not going anywhere," he said, "not without a fight." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Jacob taught her how to stay low, how to use signal blockers, and how to spot movement from the tree line. Rena taught him how to use parts of her wrecked pod. turning them into small shields and traps. It wasn't perfect, but it gave them an edge. Rena began to open up more, speaking in longer English phrases, asking about Earth, animals, music, and books. She listened to Jacob's old vinyl records and smiled when she heard soft piano songs. He told her about his past, about the war, about losing his family, about the silence he chose afterward. And she listened, quietly, always watching his face like she was reading a story in his eyes. One night, she said softly, "You saved me twice now," he answered. "You saved yourself? I just made you tea." That same night, a drone flew over the farm. Barely visible, Rena spotted it first and dragged Jacob to the ground before it passed. He aimed to shoot it down, but Rena stopped him. No fight yet. She whispered, "They test first," so they waited, breathing slowly. Hearts pounding in rhythm. The drone circled once, then vanished into the sky. They didn't speak after that. Just went back inside and sat in silence. Jacob poured tea. Rena added sugar, and both stared into the fire. They knew what was coming. It wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about standing their ground the next morning. A black car appeared on the edge of the property. Two figures stepped out, humanoid in shape, but their eyes glowed gold. Jacob stepped onto the porch. Rifle in hand, calm but firm, one of them raised a hand and spoke in broken English. "We search for escaped royal, dangerous, unstable." Jacob didn't blink, didn't move, just said, "No royalty here." The figure's head tilted slightly, scanning him, then replied, "You protect her. Why?" Jacob answered simply. "Because she's worth protecting." They stood silent for a moment, then returned to their car and vanished into the trees. But Rena knew it was not the end, was the beginning of something far more dangerous. That night, Rena sat beside Jacob, with her head resting on his shoulder. She whispered, "If I stay, you will fight," he replied, without looking at her, every time she closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time since she crashed on Earth, she no longer felt like she was running. For the first time, someone was running beside her. And the sky, though dangerous, no longer looked so cold. A strange kind of family. The next morning felt like any other, but Rena noticed it first. The birds were silent. Not one chirped from the forest edge. Jacob stepped outside, holding his coffee, and scanned the trees with trained eyes. The air felt heavier, as if it knew something was coming. He looked back at Rena, who stood barefoot in the doorway, her silver hair braided, her violet skin now hidden under a long coat. She didn't say anything, but her eyes met his. And that was enough. Something had changed, the kind of silence that came before a storm. But inside the cabin, life continued with quiet effort. Rena washed dishes. Jacob repaired the radio. And both acted like the world wasn't closing in. They weren't fooling each other, but they had learned how to live in danger without letting it steal their breath. Later that day, a knock came at the door. Not loud, but firm. Rena froze, stepping back, while Jacob raised his rifle just enough to be ready. He opened the door slowly and found a young woman standing outside. She had long brown hair, army boots, and a scar down her neck. Her name was Clara. "Jacob," she said with a half smile, still collecting strange things. He laughed once, low and tired. Only the rarest ones. Clara looked past him and saw Rena, who stood still as stone. Then Clara said, "You weren't joking on the radio." Jacob replied, "Never do." They stepped inside. And Clara gave Rena a warm nod. No questions, no fear, just understanding by evening. Two more arrived, joggers in May, both old squad mates of Jacob. Together, they had seen wars on Earth, deserts, cities, places no one remembered anymore now. They sat at Jacob's table, eating stew and talking like no time had passed. Rena watched them quietly, listening to their stories and laughter. She laughed once when Rogers told how Jacob used to talk to frogs during long missions. Jacob rolled his eyes and said, "Better company than most people." The night passed like a strange Holiday Inn alien girl, human soldiers, and a sense of peace none had felt in years. But underneath it, everyone knew why they were here, not just to visit, but to defend. The plan started the next day. Jacob and his team mapped out every corner of the forest. They placed motion sensors, rigged sound traps, and set barriers around the crash site. Rena helped too, showing them how to place fragments of alien tech that could bend light and confuse heat scans. She worked silently but efficiently, as if building this web of protection gave her purpose. At one point, Clara looked at her and said, "You're one of us now." Rena didn't answer, just smiled and tightened a wire with glowing fingers. That evening, they stood around the campfire near the barn, watching the stars. Rogers whispered, "Think they'll come tonight?" Jacob said nothing, but his grip on the rifle tightened. Inside the cabin, Rena found a small photo on the shelf. It showed Jacob with a woman and a little boy, smiling in front of the same cabin. She held it for a long time, then placed it back without a word. Later, she gave Jacob a drawing of flower with 2 roots growing from the same soil. He looked at it for a long moment, then nodded. The message was clear, though they came from different worlds. They were connected now. Outside, the wind carried distant static, the kind that didn't belong to Earth. May tuned into the signal, and her face turned pale. "They're talking," she said. "They're close." Jacob gave one nod, then looked at Rena. "Ready?" She nodded once, not with fear, but with fire. The next morning, Rena walked with Clara to the village. They wore hooded coats, dark glasses, and spoke only when needed. The villager smiled at Jacob's quiet guest and offered bread, eggs, and even flowers. One little girl handed Rena a small bracelet made of colored thread. Rena bowed and whispered, "Thank you." The girl giggled, "You're pretty," and ran away. Rena held the bracelet like it was a crown. Clara leaned over and whispered, "See, they like you already." Rena looked up at the sky, then back at the smiling faces. She wanted to believe this peace could last. But peace was never free. That night, the sensors pinged twice, then went silent. Jacob ordered everyone to take their positions. They didn't panic, they didn't shout. They moved like a team trained by fire and loss. Rena stood near the back, her hand on a device shaped like a stone. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Then, out of the darkness, figures moved, glowing eyes, long limbs, no voices. They stepped into the traps, triggered the barriers, and chaos began. Explosions, flashes of light, screams in a tongue no human spoke. Rena joined the fight, her device sending a wave of blue energy that dropped 3 attackers. May shouted, "Incoming from the west." Jacob and Rogers pushed forward, drawing them away from the cabin. In the end, they held the line. The enemy retreated, leaving behind nothing but footprints and blood. No one died, but Clara took a burn to the leg, and Jacob's arm was bruised. Rena sat by the fire afterward, silent, hands stained. Jacob sat beside her and said, "You did good." She looked at him, eyes filled with something between sorrow and pride. She whispered, "This is family." And Jacob nodded, because somehow it was true. Not by blood, not by species, but by choice. They were now a strange kind of family, one born from war, but shaped by kindness. The battle for one girl rain fell hard on the rooftop, each drop like a tiny drumbeat warning of what was coming. Rena sat at the window, her glowing eyes fixed on the dark tree line. Jacob was outside, checking the traps again, even though they had done so twice already. Clara and May were reinforcing the southern ridge with steel plates and pulse sensors. Rogers checked his rifle and whistled softly, pretending he wasn't worried. But the truth hung in the air like smoke tonight. They would come. Not just scouts or drones this time, but hunters. Real ones. The kind that didn't speak, didn't stop, didn't care who they hurt, and they were coming for her. Rena knew it, and this time, she didn't want to run. She walked out into the rain and stood beside Jacob, her long coat soaked through in seconds, silver hair sticking to her face. "I fight with you," she said, her voice stronger than he had ever heard it. Jacob looked at her, heart heavy. "You sure?" Rena nodded once. "They come for me, not you. Not them my fight." He didn't argue, just handed her a small device with a blinking red light. "You press this when you're in trouble, it scrambles them." She took it, slipped it into her sleeve, and whispered, "Thank you." The others gathered around the fire one last time. Eating silently, no one joked, no one smiled, but every eye burned with quiet fire. Midnight came like a slow breath held too long. Then the wind changed. The motion sensors pinged once, then silence. Everyone moved into position without a word. Clara covered the barn. Rogers took the ridge. May stayed near the pod. Jacob stayed near Rena, shotgun ready. Eyes scanning the trees. The forest was dark, but not empty. Shapes moved between branches, tall and thin, silent and smooth. Their eyes glowed faint gold. Their armor shimmered like glass in moonlight. And then they charged. Traps fired first nets. Flu alarms blared. Flash bombs lit the night like lightning. The first three were caught and shocked unconscious, but more followed. Jacob shot one mid-leap, sending it crashing into the mud. Rena raised her device and sent out a shockwave that knocked to more backward. They kept coming, faster now, some crawling like beasts, others leaping like shadows. May's turret activated and sprayed electric darts into the trees. One hunter got close enough to reach the cabin's edge, but Rogers tackled it, knife flashing, blood spraying dark against the wet ground. Clara shouted, "West side, 2 more." Jacob spun and fired, covering Rena as she activated her last pulse bomb, but then one of them got through. It moved too fast, too low, sliding beneath the traps. It grabbed Rena and pulled her toward the trees. Jacob turned too late, shouting her name. Rena struggled, kicking, scratching, screaming in her alien tongue, but it didn't stop till she grabbed the small device in her sleeve and pressed it. A blast of sound cracked the air, and the creature dropped her with a shriek. She fell hard, rolled, and crawled toward the cabin. Jacob reached her, pulled her into cover, and fired again. The creature vanished into the trees, limping for a moment. There was silence, only the rain and the low groans of wounded men. The hunters began to retreat, disappearing one by one into the black forest, not defeated, but pushed back. The team held position for another hour before finally lowering their weapons. Rena stood slowly, drenched and shaking, but not broken. Her hands bled, her coat was torn, but her eyes were calm. Jacob looked at her and whispered, "You fought like a soldier." She answered, "I fought for family." And that night, every person in that cabin believed her. May treated burns. Rogers wrapped his ribs. Clara stitched her own leg. Rena cleaned her wounds in silence, then helped Jacob repair the broken door. Later, they sat in the quiet, fire flickering low, the cabin. Smelling of smoke and sweat and blood, Jacob took out a worn box and opened it, revealing medals and old photographs. "I used to think I was done fighting," he said, voice low. "But maybe some fights are worth starting over for." Rena looked at the medals. Then at the man beside her. She placed her hand over his and said, "This is not the end, and?" Jacob nodded because she was right. The war wasn't over, not yet, but tonight they had won because she was still here, and they were still together. Earth says no asterisk. The cabin smelled of smoke and rain, but it still stood. Rena stood barefoot on the porch, looking at the forest that once tried to take her. Her hands still shook from the fight. but her heart felt steadier than ever before. She had been hunted across stars, hated by her own blood. But Earth, this strange little planet, had done something her empire never did. It had protected her. Inside, Jacob was on the old radio, speaking in calm, short words. Clara sat with a bandage around her leg, May poured coffee, and Rogers sharpened his blade. But all of them kept glancing at Rena like she wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of the home they'd all forgotten how to build. The news came at noon, flying in faster than sound. A satellite had caught the battle in the woods, grainy, but clear. Within hours, images spread of glowing attackers, of a girl wrapped in silver light, and behind her, human soldiers with fire in their eyes. Reporters came knocking, but Jacob turned them away. A few didn't leave quietly until Rogers showed them what a shovel looked like up close. Still, the world had seen enough, and the world had questions. Who was she? Why was she here? And why were people willing to fight for her? And then the message came not from Earth, but from the stars, a broadcast from her former empire, cold and full of command. This exile is dangerous. The message said she must be returned, or neutralized. Governments across Earth met behind closed doors. Unsure what to do, some feared war, others feared change, and many simply feared the unknown. But something new was rising. Public voices, loud and angry, people who saw the videos, heard the stories, and said, "She's one of us now." Children sent letters, artists painted her face, and a group of veterans even marched for her. The tide turned, not because of orders, but because of hearts, and the world that once feared aliens began to see one as family. Rena watched all this from Jacob's small TV. Eyes wide, fingers curled into her sleeves, she whispered, "They believe in me," and Jacob nodded. Of course they do. Soon, a global summit was called, and Rena was invited. She wore a simple dress, earth-made, with her silver hair braided neatly. Jacob stood beside her in his old uniform, medals shining dull in the light. The chamber was massive, filled with humans from every nation, and screens lit with stars. Rena stepped forward, not trembling this time, but walking like someone with purpose. She spoke softly. "I was born to rule, but no one taught me kindness. I learned that here from the man who should have feared me, but didn't. I am not a weapon, not a danger. I am someone trying to be better." And the room, once cold with politics, fell silent with respect. One ambassador stood and asked, "Why should Earth risk war for one girl?" Rena looked at him, then answered, "'Cause Earth is not afraid of doing what's right." Then Jacob spoke, voice strong. "If protecting her means war, then let them come. But they'll find something here they never expected. People who stand for strangers, soldiers who fight for peace, and a planet that does not bow to bullies." The speech was broadcast across worlds, and it did what guns could not. It made the Empire hesitate. It made the galaxy take notice. A final message came days later from the alien throne itself. "We will not pursue her, but she may not return." It was not forgiveness, but it was surrender. Rena cried quietly that night, not from fear, but from relief. She stood in the field behind the cabin, arms out, rain soaking her dress. Jacob watched her from the porch, smiling. "You're free now," he said, and she turned to him, eyes wet. "Only because of you." She whispered. "No," he replied, "because you chose to stay and fight." And that made all the difference. Weeks passed, and life returned to a quiet rhythm. Rena helped rebuild the garden, painted the cabin walls, and even started teaching local kids about stars. She visited the village often, always smiling, always. Kind children ran to her, calling her Star Lady, and she laughed like someone who had finally found peace. Jacob sat on his porch each evening, sipping tea, watching her live the life she earned. And though Earth spun on and the stars stayed far, something had changed forever. One girl, had crashed here, hunted and broken. Now she stood tall, protected not by weapons, but by love. And the world that welcomed her had become more than just her home. It had become the place where she was truly seen. Something more years had passed since the night Rena fell from the sky. The cabin in the woods still stood, stronger now, painted. Soft blue with white trim, the forest had grown back around it, peaceful, untouched, as if it had never seen war. But the people who lived inside it were not the same. Rena walked barefoot through the garden, her long silver hair braided with wildflowers. Children ran past her, laughing. Two of them with their strange, glowing eyes. Jacob sat on the porch, watching them all with a quiet smile he no longer carried. A rifle, but he still kept it above the fireplace, just in case the world outside had changed. Borders widened, and old enemies had grown quiet. But the peace in this place was built not on politics, but on trust. Rena was now Earth's voice in the stars, not because anyone forced her, but because she chose to be. She traveled to distant councils, met leaders from dozens of alien systems. She spoke calmly, clearly, with stories instead of threats, and each time she ended her speech, she said the same thing. Kindness is the strongest shield, and those who had once hunted her now listened instead. Some still didn't agree, some never would. But none dared attack again, not after what Earth had done, not after what one man and one girl had stood for. Back home, the cabin became a place of learning. Children came to visit, to hear Rena speak of stars and strange moons. She taught them to respect silence, to listen before speaking. And they brought her stories of their own, drawings, questions, dreams. Jacob helped build a new shed, then a classroom, then a small observatory, just in case the stars want to send more visitors, he joked. He was older now, his hands slower, but his eyes still sharp. Rena helped him walk when his knees hurt, and he never complained, because she had once crawled through fire just to survive. And now she danced under Earth's sun like she was finally whole. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Jacob looked at the two children napping in the next room. He turned to Rena and asked, "Do you miss your home?" She thought for a long moment. Before answering, "I miss what it should have been," she said, "but not what it was." He nodded and reached for her hand across the table. "You built something better here," he said. "You didn't just escape, you became." She smiled and leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "I didn't become alone," and Jacob knew she was right. Later that night, under a sky full of stars, Rena stepped outside and stood barefoot in the grass. She looked up, hands behind her back, the cool breeze touching her skin. A distant ship blinked in the sky, passing silently. Overhead, it no longer made her flinch, no longer reminded her of pain. Now it reminded her of how far she had come. She whispered an old word from her native tongue, one Jacob never asked her to translate. Then she turned as Jacob walked out to join her. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside her. They said nothing for a while, because some silences are not empty, they are full. In time, a small plaque was placed at the edge of the garden. It read, "Here fell a stranger. Here rose a friend. Here lives something more." Pilgrims came from other planets to see it, to hear her speak, but Rena always told them the same thing. "This is not my story alone, it's Earth's story too. The day you protect someone, not because you must, but because you want to, that's the day your world changes, and the ones who listened left quietly, changed in ways they didn't fully understand, because the lesson was simple. The strongest worlds are built not on power, but on care." And so, Rena stayed, through seasons, storms, and peace, not because she was trapped, but because she was finally free. She had left behind a throne and found a family. She had fled from war and found warmth, and though the stars still called to her, she always returned to the same place, the little cabin the quiet woods, and the man who showed her what it meant to be safe. To be known, to be loved. They never signed papers, never wore rings, never needed to, because everyone who saw them knew Rena had not just found a home, she had become part of one.